Hello everyone, welcome to StudyTravel TV Live, a show of news, statistics and opinion. I'm Matthew Knott, news editor of StudyTravel Magazine.
Hello everyone, I'm Josh Walton, staff journalist at StudyTravel Magazine. Before we get started, for the best viewing experience, please put the call in side-by-side speaker view. You'll see an icon in the top right corner where you can select the view.
We are delighted to welcome you all today to this episode of StudyTravel TV Live. In today's broadcast, we'll begin with a news story and then we'll be joined by our guest this week, Ramon Villa Menendez, CEO of Language Kingdom Agency in Spain, and Caroline Tissot, CEO of Maltese Language School Association, Feltom.
If you have any questions for the presenters or guest speakers or comments on the stories, please post them in the chat box and we'll read them out at the end. A big thank you to the sponsor of this episode, Londonist.
Okay, let's take a look at our first story. And Malta has eased its travel restrictions ahead of the busy summer season. The government has scrapped the classification of red and dark red countries, meaning that students will now be able to travel to Malta from anywhere.
Since last week, passengers have been able to enter Malta with either a vaccination certificate, proof of recovery from COVID-19, a negative PCR test taken within the last 72 hours, or a negative antigen test in the last 24 hours.
Malta's Language School Association, Feltom, had been calling for a relaxation of entry measures to help the country build up confidence in the agency market. Rebecca Bonici, chair of Feltom, welcomed the development and told StudyTravel Magazine that schools had sustained blow after blow because of the pandemic and were welcoming the opportunity to get back on their feet.
Rebecca added that Feltom was now gearing up to restart inspections of schools and that maintenance of quality standards was of paramount importance.
Okay, so at this point, we'd like to introduce our guests this week, Caroline and Ramon. Hello, Caroline.
Hi, Matthew. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you for joining us. We'll just wait for Ramon to appear. There he is. Hi, Ramon.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, as always, for inviting me, for having me here today.
Thanks for joining us. Caroline, if we could begin with you. This is excellent news for Malta and the wider ELT sector and agencies. How are things looking for the summer now?
Yes, it is great news, actually. As you correctly said, we had been lobbying with the government to amend the red list or even the dark red list, or even allow the entry to the country for those students whose certificates are actually recognized locally. So the complete lifting is one step further, really. The summer is looking pretty healthy, I would say. As you know, over the years, our summer is predominantly the junior market that we see traveling to Malta. And that, as I said, is looking rather healthy. The students who would normally be traveling from the dark red list countries, for example, coming from afar as Brazil and Colombia, etc. Of course, we would have preferred if the lifting happened slightly earlier, so that plans could have happened earlier by the students, giving them the time to make the necessary arrangements that they needed to do in order to arrive. However, as I said, the summer is looking healthy. The European travel market is looking not obviously, we haven't yet reached the full numbers that we had in 2019. However, it is looking very, very good, very positive. And I think this is the kickstart that we need to start recuperating from the couple of years that we have lost, you know, the student bookings that we had due to the various closures, etc., and the pandemic.
Thanks. And I gather that we can expect official government data on 2021 imminently. And what can we expect to see in that, do you think?
Yes, as you said, the data hasn't yet been released. However, I'm informed that it should be made available within the next week or so. The data, yet again, I think will be what I expect to see is the severity of the blow that the extension of the pandemic has wreaked on the industry, and more importantly, the 2 closures that we had last year. Probably I could say that from a student arrival perspective, the numbers will be much lower than obviously when we're comparing notes with the 2019 numbers. However, I expect to see as well a slight increase in the number of online tuition that was taken up by students, especially during the March to May period when the school was originally closed, because the schools were closed to in-person students, but they were able to take online classes. Then the second closure that happened in July, which was at the peak, at the start actually of our busiest period, where we were planning to see numbers that reach the 2019 levels. That closure definitely will impact the numbers, and we'll see a huge drop in the revenue, in the tuition, in the tuition weeks and the tuition revenue as well that the schools would have generated. So it is going to be, I think, a bit of a bleak outlook into 2021. However, again, we hope that this is in the past, that now we are looking 2022 and we are looking to a road to recovery, and hopefully things will improve.
Fingers crossed, yeah.
Fingers crossed always.
Ramon, you were on our show last year, not long after that closure that Caroline has just talked about in the summer, and it was a move that impacted on schools in Malta and agencies in Europe and elsewhere. Have Spanish agencies got the confidence to send to Malta this summer?
Yes, I was in the show with Andrew right
That's
after
right, yeah.
everything happened. No, and it was a difficult moment for both the schools and agencies, no, because we're still dealing more with what happened, not only with the cancellation, but also with the situation of those students who remained there in the island in quarantine. So I had to ask other colleagues, and I've been making a couple of calls before the show to find out really how their perspective was, because I was, somehow traumatized by the experience last summer. So I was quite cautious, in promoting and pushing. But suddenly we realized the demand was there right after probably January, February. And I think it's a multi-factor combination. The first one is related with European funds. We have strong funding, which cannot eventually end in the UK. Second, I think the memory of our customers is fragile, and there's a there's a demand and a huge condensed demand in the last few years for courses abroad. We're specialists in juniors, but we do also adults, and we noticed that. So it was myself at the beginning, as I said, a bit cautious about offering, but now we've got groups, we've got people, not only in summer, but also teachers attending methodology courses. And what I shared and heard from other agencies, we know is that the demand is high also with adults, not only with juniors. So I'm happy, I'm pleased, and I'm surprised that the market is more or less not perhaps like 2019, and I'm taking 2021 because Malta was almost the only country which was doing courses last summer. But I'm happy to go back to Malta. Of course, there are also issues to sort, because there's an accommodation problem at the moment in Malta. We haven't mentioned that, and I'm sure Caroline does agree with me that
yeah, well, we'll come on to that later in the show, actually. Yeah.
So yeah, and I think we can continue with that positivity, and hopefully the summer and after summer is going to keep healthy, as Caroline said.
Thanks, Ramon. And Caroline, it was an interesting point that Rebecca from Feltom made about restarting inspections. How has Feltom worked to maintain and ensure quality standards during the pandemic?
Our last official inspection happened in 2019. So when COVID hit Malta really in March 2020, it was the Accreditation Council decided to extend the accreditation by a year, because obviously inspections had just happened. In the hope, we obviously never thought that the pandemic would last so long. We thought it was going to be a repeat of SARS in 2003, when come the summer hot months, it just evaporated into nothing. Unfortunately, it wasn't meant to be. So when last year came around, and again we had the closures in the spring, and then the closures in the summer, it was a bit of a futile exercise to have inspections done when the students weren't there, or when there were just a handful of students. I didn't think it would give a real insight into what the inspectors were looking at. So what we did is, throughout these 2 years, we have kept in constant communication with our schools. And also, Feltom and the Accreditation Council has 3 seats on the ELT Council, which is the regulator on our island, which is affiliated with the Ministry for Education. And that way we are constantly in communication with any happenings, any goings on that were taking place, and we're, as I said, in communication with our schools. So what we chose to do then, what we decided to do last year, especially after the summer closure, we decided to have a desk review, which took place at the end of the year, in the last quarter, whereby the schools were invited to provide us with the internal audit reports and all the documents pertaining to that. And these were inspected by an inspector, a fully qualified inspector from our end, to make sure that matters are in hand, and any little tweaks that needed to be done were highlighted to them in preparation of this year's fully fledged. Now we're going all out, back to our usual procedure. I'm happy to report that there were no huge anomalies at all whatsoever, just a few little tweaks. So that way we've kept the ball rolling. We didn't just, close the door and throw away the key just for the 2 years. So everything was kept very much alive and very much updated as we went along.
Thanks, Caroline. Sounds like a very busy period. And let's take a look at another story. Lots of big developments in the last week in New Zealand, not least the fact that the country has brought forward the final stage of reopening to July 31st, 3 months earlier than originally planned. This means that student visa processing will begin from that date, and also that visitors from non-visa waiver countries can enter from then, which follows the opening to visa waiver visitors earlier this month.
At the same time of the reopening announcement, New Zealand confirmed changes to post-study work rights for international students. Tertiary students below degree level will only be eligible for work rights if their qualification matches a skill on the country's shortage list.
Eligible tertiary students will receive a period of work rights equivalent to the period of study in New Zealand, although Masters and PhD students will retain 3 years. Additionally, the amount evidence of living funds that students will need for student visas has increased.
And in a separate development, the government confirmed that schools will still be able to enrol fee-paying international students and groups below Year 9 after abandoning proposals to stop schools recruiting younger students. The government U-turn was welcomed by the industry there.
Ramon, whilst the announcement stated that below degree level students will only get post-study work rights if their qualification matches areas of skill shortages, with an unemployment rate of 3.2%, New Zealand will effectively have skill shortages in all trades, with part-time work rights for long-term language students and work and holiday streams. All this makes NZ quite attractive. Are Spanish students taking notice, do you think?
Not only Spanish students, I guess, or European and worldwide students will benefit from that. And the fact of, facing recession here in Europe, this kind of incentives, I think they're fantastic to promote those destinations. And despite the measures is still very early stage, I'm sure that not only Language Kingdom, but also other agencies will work, on promoting that, because especially, and we noticed in previous crises, the the fact of having a recession in the area where we live in Europe, in this case, will push students, especially postgraduate students and graduate students, to try abroad a new fortune. So I think it's an attractive selling point, and definitely I think all agencies will push this kind of products again.
Very good, thank you. Caroline, the government of New Zealand was thanked by the sector last week for listening to its concerns and for backtracking on those proposals to stop the recruitment of younger students for schools. Has the government of Malta listened to the sector's concerns during the pandemic?
I think that's a weighted question with a lot of factors. Yes, obviously the government did listen. In the very, very initial stages, Feltom ensured, together with the ELT Council, that our niche would not be forgotten in the mayhem of all that happened unexpectedly. And that thank goodness that did happen. And we were invited on many an occasion to meet with government officials. We raised our concerns many a time. We ensured that we are not, as I said, forgotten. However, of course, there were occasions when we would have liked to have been listened to a bit quicker, perhaps. But obviously, we are very, very grateful for all the government did for us, because obviously through, we are a very resilient industry, of course, because we are still here after what looked like a very bleak period. However, this was also possible with the assistance that government did give us, and the health authorities, of course.
Thanks, Caroline. When the government released its consultation and proposals for stopping below Year 9 recruitment, it argued that relatively few international primary students transitioned to secondary study. Associations in New Zealand said they had misunderstood that brief stays at that younger age were an important stepping stone to later study in the country. Ramon, your agency deals extensively with the high school sector. Would you agree with that?
I mean, we don't work extensively with New Zealand because this is still quite far from where we are, and we have options closer and a bit more popular, like the States, in Canada, even in farther distance. No? But definitely taster courses and short stay courses, integration programs are the first stone to develop. And most 90%, I will say even more, of our students have had a previous experience abroad in a kind of program at early age. Even my son this year is trying something like that, and he's 9-10 years old, and it's like a previous step to study secondary abroad. So I think not only as an agent but also as a father, I can say that this is a reasonable step on every single student, and this is something that our stats in Language Kingdom and also in STprofe share, and we all agree.
Fantastic. No, 90% is a very good return rate, Ramon.
It is, but the reality is that nobody's going to, or most of the students and most of the families are not going to send a student abroad thousands of miles from home with no previous experience. So a taster 2-week, 3-week course at the beginning of the year in a boarding school, or even a summer program, an integration program, is a first step to decide and to test your kids to do a step further for a half year or a full year or a semester. I think this is a natural movement.
Great stuff. Thank you. Okay, let's move on to our next story. And member schools of marketing English in Ireland suffered a 17% decrease in international students in 2021, according to data produced for the association and seen by StudyTravel Magazine, a fall that follows a 72.9% decrease in 2020.
MEI schools hosted 26,408 international students in 2021, compared with just over 32,000 the year before and 118,000 in 2019. Student weeks delivered declined by 41% to 220,499 last year, according to the MEI report.
However, those figures will certainly be trending upwards in 2022, as StudyTravel heard at the first ever StudyTravel Alfie Island event last week. A number of schools reported being at or close to full capacity, suggesting this year will be the strongest since prior to the pandemic.
Indeed, an opposite issue may be demand outstripping supply. Some schools have reported issues in recruiting an adequate number of homestay families for forthcoming months, and the sector is also facing a teacher shortage.
So the accommodation shortages in Ireland have been caused by a number of issues, including spare rooms becoming home offices, maybe some COVID reluctance to host children, and more recently an influx of refugees from the war in Ukraine that are being hosted in homes in Ireland. Caroline, as Malta more sort of fully reopens now, do you have similar concerns about homestay and teacher capacity?
Yes, these are two issues which are still of a concern for us. Obviously, as you rightly said, with regards to homestays, there was, once the pandemic hit, there was a reluctance, and there still it might be a slight reluctance, people opening their doors to host guests, possibly. There's also the element whereby, whilst people depended on it for a number of years, then suddenly this hiatus, if you wish, made them realize that they sort of regained their independence and possibly are reluctant again to open up their doors. However, we are promoting or trying to promote through the media the homestays, you know, people host families, as we call them here, to welcome students again. With regards to ELT teachers, again, yes, we do have a shortage. Together with the ELT Council, we've been working hard to try and find a solution for this. We used to have lots of recruitments coming from the UK in the past, but obviously now things are slightly different there. And we're also trying to invite, earlier on in the year, through the ELT Council, we invited university students to possibly take on a course called the TEFL course. And that will give them, for those who could, who are eligible for the course, so that they could possibly consider teaching English during the summer months. There are various thoughts in place. We've gone through the media. We're using social media to try and attract people. So we are working very actively on promoting this, especially now that the social distancing has been lifted, as we know, in the classroom. So we have a greater need for teachers, because obviously, as we know, as we mentioned earlier, thank goodness, numbers are looking pretty healthy for the summer. So we're working hard to making that very effective and possible.
Thanks. And Ramon, we know that homestay is particularly in demand for Spanish students. Are you finding accommodation capacity to be a problem this year with certain destinations or with certain types of accommodation, or both?
Yeah, struggling. It has been a very, very difficult year, I can tell you. I mean, not only in Ireland, but everywhere else. Perhaps the UK, we've noticed less problems, less struggles in the UK, but starting from Canada high school programs, also in the States, Ireland has been a nightmare in the last few months. Believe me, I haven't seen anything like that. You know, when we talk about numbers, I'm 99% sure, 100% sure that the real capacity, perhaps they cannot hit the 20 pre-pandemic numbers, just because they can accommodate the number of students we can send agencies. So it's really a problem worldwide. The big question here is if it is just a matter of 1-2 years until, you know, the COVID goes by, or it is something chronicle that we're going to face in this industry for the next decade, and it really worries me, because we cannot grow as much as the demand is there, and we cannot satisfy the demand just because we cannot accommodate the students. And I guess, Caroline, I'd like to know if you hear from schools that's happening. For example, I traditionally send a summer program in Homestay to Malta, and this year we're not going to do it because our homestay provider said they can't accommodate our group. So I hope that we're not going to face this situation in the future years, because the growth is compromised by that situation.
Go on.
Sorry, yeah, we are working very hard on that issue, because it was a matter of concern.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think the one thing that that some people mentioned in Ireland last week was that the cost of living crisis, inflation is high, and that may tempt some families back into or maybe entice some new families into the homestay sector. Do you see any evidence of that, Caroline?
There is a possibility, yes, obviously, especially since obviously with the onset of the pandemic and then the war in Ukraine and Russia, that has had quite an impact on costs, on prices, etc., and the cost of living in general. So yes, that might entice people to opt for welcoming students yet again into their midst. As we all know, the local community has the uptake of the vaccine, etc., and the local community is very, very high. We are now on the second booster dose for the 65s and over, so there's a lot of protection, if you wish, and increased protection, especially for those, because we had a large number of pensioners who used to welcome students into their homes. So that might be a possibility as well, that they might revert to welcoming students once again.
Thanks. Let's take another story now. The government of Western Australia has announced $41.2 million of funding for the international education sector as part of its 2022-2023 budget, aimed at building a pipeline of future onshore international education students.
Yes, the funding for the sector includes $10 million for an agent incentive package. The government hasn't yet given a breakdown of what will be included in that, but a further $1 million is allocated for fam trips.
The new budget also extends the ELACOS bursary fund to incentivise students to come to the state. The first round of the ELACOS bursary from previously announced funding is currently open till late June and will provide grants of $1,500 to the first 2,000 eligible students to assist with their tuition fees.
Western Australia will also create new scholarships for higher education, boost funding for Study Perth, and expand international marketing.
Ramon, Perth is the closest Australian capital city to Europe, and indeed the direct flight on Qantas from London will soon be operating again. Just looking at the language study bursary of $1,500 per student, do you expect more students to consider Perth?
Yes, definitely. I think it's already happening. It's already happening. I wish Perth were closer, no, because it's still family specific. Australia too far, but at the same time, we've seen how a huge number of students have decided for British Vancouver for years and years, and the distance. And if you see the distance on the map, it's still Perth is still farther, but not that far. No, so of course, incentive, and especially I see extremely positive the fact that the government takes conscious of the fact that they need to promote actively the both high schools, universities, language schools, because in the last 2 years, somehow customers have forgotten Australia because of the restrictions, and this is something that is kind of incentives. It is what we really expect from governments, and I definitely see a huge potential not only for Perth but also for Australia in the next few years for high schoolers, and definitely we will work on that.
And if you could choose a couple of agent incentives, which ones would you recommend to the Western Australian government to include in their budget?
Perhaps a direct funding on fees might help, but it's more about perhaps traveling, the cost of the airline tickets. They can fund somehow those costs to incentivate, and I think that could be really helpful. And a part of that, helping with the visa processes and making, easier and cheaper also will help us. But knowing Australia for some agencies, including myself, some agents like myself, is difficult, it's far, it takes time, and so the fun trip thing, I'm not a real fan of fun trips, but I must say that it's helpful. It's helpful, and if you somehow find that also helps. So that multi-factor and multi-aid thing will really help us to promote actively Australia.
Thank you. Caroline, the Malta Tourism Authority had a promotional incentive last year with a voucher scheme for students to spend locally. Things didn't quite work out as planned due to the pandemic and the closure of the schools. Is there anything similar in the pipeline this year now that Malta is sort of fully reopened for tourism?
We're not aware of any such incentives with regards to actual vouchers being given out to students to encourage them to travel to Malta. What the Malta Tourism Authority is doing, though, it will be attending many fairs where they will be promoting our industry globally, again within Europe and beyond the shores. In fact, the ELT Council and Feltom have been invited to attend a number of these fairs. So the incentive to visit Malta is going to be through promotion rather than the giving out of vouchers specifically to the students. In fact, the Malta Tourism Authority have been exceptionally helpful with regards to also the opening up of new flights or reopening of flights, really, flight routes. And they're in constant communication with us as well to ensure that once we promote our industry, then obviously travelers are able to, ELT travelers are able to come and visit our show so that they can follow their courses here. So yes, that is the situation at the moment. That is the sort of incentive that is in the pipeline.
And what kind of support would you ideally like to see for the sector from the Maltese government now, Caroline?
We would like the government to continue supporting us with as I said, the promotion, to keep attracting more students to our shore so that they can avail themselves of our exceptional English language courses here. We'd also like to see the visa department to continue assisting us with the easy access to visas, ideally. I know at the moment there's a little blip because there's a bit of a backlog. Because they've had a huge influx of visas. However, they have been very accommodating, and I hope that this will continue, so that this will obviously help to keep the wheel turning, if you wish, and students being able to come and extend their visas if they have to as well. Recently, we have had an election, and we have a new minister for education, because, as you know, the ELT sector here falls under the two ministries of tourism and education. And we hope that with the new minister, we will continue working very, very closely together to help this niche industry grow further.
Thanks, Caroline. And at this point, we'll open up to the audience to see if there are any questions for our guests or for the StudyTravel team. These can be on any of the stories or topics we've discussed.
I can't see any questions in there just as yet, but I've got a comment that a situation similar in the USA. I'm guessing that's in reference to Homestay and teacher shortages. Just while people sort of take the time to put any questions in there, Ramon, coming back to accreditation and inspections, which we talked about at the beginning of this show, from your side as an agent, do you have any concerns that schools might not have been inspected for some time because of the pandemic?
Yeah, but also agencies, we have a very strong, I think Oscar from ASEPRO mentioned how strong is our accreditation system.
Yeah.
And we haven't been inspected for, I think, 1.5 years now, and we're trying to get that bag. No, I think it's essential. But for example, talking about Feltom as an agent, and we work with several schools, we notice how, you know, the quality in the last, I've been doing this for about 15 years now, and I have noticed, you know, how much effort is putting on the quality of classes, on the quality of lessons, and also because our customers now are much more demanding, and especially with European funding, they ask for much more specific, higher quality programs, and that's the only way to guarantee that is through a very, you know, strong and undemanding inspection.
Thank you. Caroline, a couple of months ago, you advised us about some of the initiatives and scholarships that Feltom schools were offering for students and refugees from Ukraine. How's all of that going?
Going well. We've had many requests come in through the Federation, and also some have approached our schools, because obviously people became aware of it even through the local media. We are very close. I'm in very close contact as a federation with both the non-resident ambassador and as well the Ukrainian community here in Malta, who's responsible for also liaising on this. We've had quite an uptake. We've had also people contacting us directly from Ukraine to see whether they could send their students here, their children rather here. And there's also something else brewing in the pipeline that we hope will launch very, very soon, but there'll be more details on that to come. One thing, if I may just add, which I did not mention earlier, just yesterday evening, I don't know whether you have become aware of this, but the Minister for Health has announced that all children under the age of 12 now do not require PCR tests upon arrival in Malta. So that might even help families to come and study English here, you know, and enjoy the summer holiday at the same time. So that was quite an interesting point as well to make.
Thank you.
Thanks, Caroline. Okay, doesn't look like there are any other questions in the chat box. So that's the end of our audience Q&A today, which brings us to the end of this week's StudyTravel TV Live.
Yes, our next episode will be on Wednesday, the 1st of June at the same time of 4 p.m. BST. Visit the StudyTravel TV Live page on the StudyTravel Network, which you can find under the magazine section in the menu, where we'll be announcing the guest speakers for the next broadcast, and you'll be able to find a recording of this episode and all the past episodes.
So that's it for today. We'd like to say a big thank you to our special guests. Caroline, thank you for your time and insights today.
You're welcome. Thank you very much for having us.
And Ramon, thank you for joining us and sharing your thoughts and for your research before the show with your fellow agencies in Asaprose. Much appreciated. We look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
And thank you again to our sponsor for this week, Londonist.